afternoon. So the recording is on, and this is part of the Temple Beth Torah Lunchtime Learning program entitled The Purim Story We Don't Tell Children. Shh. Because Purim is fun. Purim is an exciting day. Purim is what we build up to the children when in some synagogues where they discourage Halloween, because Halloween is All Saints' Day, they say you'll get a chance to dress up for Purim. Purim is fun, it's frivolous, and the Book of Esther can be kind of intense. It's a different story than we tell the kids. But let's start with the nice parts of Purim that are part of our our modern observance. I'm going to share the screen now. Wait a second. Slideshow from beginning. Okay. So do you see now mitzvot for Purim?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So there are 4 primary mitzvot that have become part of tradition. Okay. So a mitzvah is what we are supposed to do. Mitzvah means commandment. The first one is to hear the Book of Esther, preferably in its entirety. The second, a modern mitzvah, is giving gifts of food. They're called shalach manot, and these gifts of food can be to anybody, not necessarily to needies. They can be to your friends. They can be to strangers. Yesterday, we had a rabbis meeting, and the president of the Rabbinic Association decided that he would buy lunch for all the rabbis who wanted it. And he drove around to bring us all lunch, and no good deed goes unpunished. And poor Rabbi Gideon got into a car accident. But he's okay. His car isn't. The third is tzedakah, right? The tzedakah is a mitzvah on Purim, and you are supposed to give tzedakah to the needy. And the fourth mitzvah is enjoy a festive meal. Those are the 4 mitzvot that are connected with Purim. There is one more in the Orthodox tradition, is that it's a minor fast day, fasting from sunrise to sunset, which makes what you imbibe on Purim all the more imbibing. But now there's a difference between a custom and a commandment. Customs that we've taken on. Children love Purim, it's parties, carnivals, and costume contests. And adults, this is one of the holidays where drinking is encouraged. Drink until you don't know the difference between Haman and Mordecai. And of course, everybody loves Hamantashen. But now we're going to start exploring the actual text of Purim and some things about Purim that you may or may not know. And once again, for those who came late, since it's a small group, I'm not insisting you mute unless you have distracting noise in the background. Anytime you'd like to interrupt, I cannot see you because I only see the screen I'm sharing. So don't raise your hand if you want to say something, interrupt. The Book of Esther is the only book in the Tanakh being the written Bible, 5 books of Moses, the prophets, and the writings. The Book of Esther is in the 3rd section of writings, but it's the only book in the entire written text of Torah that does not include God's name. We'll talk a little bit about why later, or not exactly why, but theories as to why. Haman, the villain, is said to be descended from King Agag. This is not fact. This is theory. But because he's referred to in the Book of Esther as the son of Hamadatta the Agagite, it's assumed that he was descended from King Agag from the Amalekites. The Amalekites were enemies of the Jewish people. They made life very difficult when we were crossing the desert. And there is a section in the Torah that says, remember the Amalekites, and we are to rid the world of the Amalekites. I like to think that it's not about that we're commanded to do genocide, but that we're more commanded to rid the world of that kind of hatred that the Amalekites expressed. But some say that part of Saul's punishment for not killing the king Agag, who was actually killed by Samuel, was that Haman lived. We don't know that for sure, but it's one of the things that that some people say. You also should know that some believe the whole story to be literary fiction, that this story was created because Jews were often being persecuted, and we needed a situation to say, hey, we're not so weak, we can fend for ourselves. That's one of the theories as to why God's name isn't mentioned, because instead of waiting for God to create a miracle like splitting the sea, we relied on our own ingenuity from the wisdom of Esther and Mordecai. But within the text, there is an awful lot of sex and violence. And so it's very interesting to think about, why does all that happen? So now we're going to get into the actual text. Would someone like to, can you read this on the screen well enough? Would someone like to read this out loud?
I'll read it, Rabbi.
Thank you.
On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was fair to look on.
Thank you. Was that Hannah? Is
Yeah.
that Hannah?
Yeah.
I thought I recognized your voice. Great.
Thank you.
Yes. So the story starts with the king throwing a big party for drinking and drinking and drinking, days on end. For 7 whole days, they're drinking, and his friends, the chamberlains, say, bring Vashti, the queen, with her royal, wearing her crown. The suggestion is that because it says she's wearing the crown, she's not wearing anything else. That she is supposed to come and dance before all these drunken men without any clothes on. And go ahead and continue, Hannah.
But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him.
Okay, so how many of the women present here would want to obey an order like that? Come dance in front of your husband with all his drunken friends. And so he didn't like the fact that she said no. Someone else want to read this next part?
Then the king said to the wise men, what shall we do to the queen Vashti according to law? Because she did not perform the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains. And the chamberlains answered before the king and the princes, Vashti, the queen, has not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes and to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus.
If your wife can say no to you, then everybody else is going to find out about it. And she's not only disrespecting you, she's disrespecting everybody. Continue, Debbie. Can you read that to the bottom?
For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes when it shall be reported. The king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not.
So here we have a situation where they're telling him that if women are allowed to be so disrespectful as to not want to dance naked in front of you and your drunken friends, then men will no longer have the upper hand. They continue at the top here.
When the ladies of Persia hear of the deed of the queen, there will be too much contempt and wrath.
Men will never be able to get their wives to do what they tell them to do. Oy. So the queen is banished. She is kicked out of the country. Vashti has become in modern times in the traditional telling, Vashti's a villain. She's the evil one who is disobedient to the king, and how can he possibly tolerate that? In modern times, Vashti has become almost a heroine of feminists who say, yes, a woman has a right to stand up for herself. But then, after all these things, he misses having a wife. So now he needs a plan for how he's going to get his needs satisfied once again. All right, somebody read for us this next section, 2:2. And then this is, the numbers are chapter and verse. This is from the Book of Esther, chapter 2, verse 2. Anyone?
I'll read it.
Go ahead.
Then said the king's servants, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. And lest the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins into Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, into the custody of Hegi, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them, and let the maidens who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti.
Go ahead, finish.
This thought pleased the king, and he did so.
All right. So why wouldn't it please him? Bring in all the fair young virgins and let them become purified. Give them perfumes, give them oils, give them ways to make themselves beautiful for the king, and then he'll have his pick. And how did this take place? Someone give us the 2:12.
Now, when every maiden's turn was to come to King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months, according to the manner of the woman, for so were the days of their purification accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet perfumes, and with other things for the purification of the women.
Now compare this to the children's story that we tell. We say that there was a beauty contest. Now this beauty contest didn't have the swimsuit competition, didn't have the talent competition. This purification process, this beautification process with the scents and the perfumes and everything, this was to take their turn to spend a night with the king. The talent was whatever talents they could exhibit in a night with the king. 12 months they would prepare for their one night. Now, when it was Esther's turn to go to the king, she didn't need anything else. And she obtained favor in the sight of all that looked upon her. She apparently was this great beauty that everybody looked at. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal house in the 10th month of the 7th year of his reign. So for 10 months, he is basically auditioning queens, giving each of them time alone with him. And what was the result?
And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti.
All right, and the slip of the tongue there, she gained grace and flavor. Maybe it was flavor as well, who knows? But now we're moving into, so here is how Esther becomes the queen. It is, to say the least, a not quite ladylike or dignified. And if anybody would like to comment on that, go right ahead. But it seems like Esther's ascent to queenhood, if you were to Google the words Esther and whore, you would probably get some hits. Did I lose anybody?
Mm-mm.
All right. So now we're going to come to where Haman makes his first appearance. He has been appointed the prime minister, the king's assistant. He has asked everyone to bow to him. Someone begin to tell us about Haman.
And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or show reverence to him, then Haman was full of wrath, and he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had shown him disrespect. Then Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, for they were the people of Mordecai.
Yes. So this is very significant about the essence of anti-Semitism, that one person insulted one person, or one person felt insulted by one person. Mordecai said, I do not bow to a human being. I only bow to God in heaven. Haman took issue with that, but it wasn't Mordecai. It starts by saying he sought to lay hands on Mordecai alone, but he put it as all the Jews. This is not just anti-Semitism, but all prejudice, where we take one person's actions and paint everybody with the same brush. Here is what Haman was doing to the Jews by saying, this one Jew made me angry, and so I want to get rid of all of them. All right, so we don't necessarily have to read this word for word, that he basically asks the king, can I get rid of these people? And the king says, well, you know, you're in charge, so go ahead. And Haman sweetens the pot by saying, I'm gonna pay. And the king says, okay, if money's involved, do whatever you want. Now, here was the line that made me stand up a little bit. So someone read this 315. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, oops. Wait a minute. Oh, shoot.
And all the rulers of the provinces.
No, wait a minute. I have to, how do I go back? I don't know how I go back. There we go. Go ahead, Debbie.
The post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace, And the king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city, Shushan, was perplexed.
So this line made me take notice. What does this say to anybody?
People didn't know what to make of the decree and what they should be doing. So they were
Yeah,
confused.
right. Here's this decree that and the decree was that on a particular day, Jews may be murdered. Now, so I'm extrapolating this, and maybe I'm wrong, but what it sounds like to me is that most of the people of Shushan had nothing against the Jews, that this was Haman's personal battle. He got it to be perpetuated, and the people were like, I don't know, if that's the law, that's the law. Some has been made, and I don't know that I personally subscribe to it, but the idea that that Haman and Hitler share the first letter of their names. But it's not too much of a stretch to look at how one person tries to influence many people to go with what they want. All right. So, all right. So now I'm gonna stop the share for a minute. First of all, any discussion about what we've got to so far? There is a decree out to murder the Jews because of Haman's difficulty with them. There's another piece in here where, in the text, where Mordecai shows particular bravery by unfolding a plot to kill the king, and his deed is recorded in a book, and the king one day is looking through the books and realizes that Mordecai's never been honored for this act of bravery. And so he calls Haman, of all people, in to say, what should I do to honor someone I want to honor? And Haman gives this great long list. Let him wear your royal robes and your royal ring and your royal crown, and have somebody important take him on a horse and lead him through the town and say, this is the man the king wants to honor. And Haman is thinking he's honoring me. And of course, he's honoring Mordecai instead. And so Haman has the insult to injury of having to lead this horse and seeing his bitter enemy led through the town. Then we have a place where Mordecai comes to Esther and says, you're the queen. You have some influence on the king. You can save our people. And she fasts for 3 days while she is contemplating what to do. One of the legends is that she ate nothing but poppy seeds. Now, we know that poppy seeds we know this from the Wizard of Oz, poppy seeds can have an opiate effect, but it's one of the reasons why poppy seeds are one of the traditional flavors for Hamantaschen. And it's also the reason why the Orthodox fast on Purim day before drinking. So we have the part that people know where Esther, after her fasting, decides on her plan to throw a banquet for the king and for Haman. And that's when she reveals that she was Jewish, that Haman has been trying to kill the Jews. And so the plot gets turned upside down, that the king says, my wife is more important to me than my assistant, and everything that Haman had planned for the Jews will be done to Haman. The gallows that he built for Mordecai to hang on, that will be Haman's gallows. And so Mordecai all of a sudden becomes, in the king's eyes, as the Haman replacement, basically. That he says, Haman's no good, you're fired, I'm going to replace you with a new assistant. I'm not sure of any other recent leaders in American history who like to fire people and replace them immediately, but maybe we'll think of one. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So Mordecai is now top dog in the king's eyes. Wait a minute. I got to go back to the share.
Did Haman have any dealings with the Jewish people before?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Yeah, it doesn't. There isn't an indication that I've seen that there was anything that happened before that. That it was more about that. It was this one incident that I'm now important and you're not bowing down to me. The only hint of that is the supposition of the longtime feud if Haman is in fact an Amalekite. Just because he's called Haman the Agagite doesn't necessarily mean that he's Amalek. Now this is actually an interesting piece as well, because the Torah says, do not forget what the Amalekites did to you in the desert, and you are to rid the world of the Amalekite. I always had a hard time with that. Seemed to me like genocide. That how is the Torah telling us to rid the world of a people? And someone said to me, and I hinted at this a little bit earlier, that maybe our obligation is to rid the world of an Amalekite-like attitude. That what the Amalekites did to the Israelites in the desert was they made the passage from Egypt to the promised land very difficult for them. And so this idea of hating the stranger and blocking their path perhaps is the attitude of the Amalekite. And as soon as we get to the promised land, we receive the instructions that say, treat the stranger as a native, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And so while we always have contradictory teachings, both in Torah and Talmud. So we have, don't trust the Amalekite and treat the stranger kindly. This is where we have to use some judgment in terms of that there is evil. Part of what Purim teaches us is there is evil in the world, and we need to be able to recognize it. But at the same time, if we're going to paint everyone with the same brush, that's what was done to us. Haman painted everyone with the same brush and said, because I don't like this one Jew, all Jews should die. So we have to, in my humble opinion, we have to be able to separate from a Haman who is evil and another Persian who may not be. It says the city of Shushan was perplexed. They didn't know what to do about it. My reading of that, my, albeit admittedly, liberal, peace-loving, pacifist reading of it is that the other Persians didn't necessarily have anything against the Jews. And yet they were given this decree that they were permitted to kill the Jews. Now, what happens is they don't follow through, because part of Esther's plan is that she says, put out another decree saying that any Jew in fear can defend himself. And here's where it gets interesting. Um, on slide 9. All right. The rulers of the provinces and the lieutenants and deputies and officers of the king helped the Jews because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. So now, instead of fearing Haman, they were going to do whatever Haman said because Haman had the king's ear. Now it's Mordecai. And Mordecai is great in the king's house. His fame went throughout all the provinces, and Mordecai was waxed greatly. And thus the Jews smote all their enemies with a stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. I'm calling this a preemptive strike. And somebody else can disagree with me, but what in some ways you could justify it by saying this is self-defense because people were told that they could kill us. But it doesn't indicate that they're attacking somebody who is actively killing them. Now, the words preemptive strike, I heard a while ago in a book by Jimmy Carter that was very controversial called, it was comparing the Palestinian situation to apartheid. And it mentioned the preemptive strike in 1967, where Israel attacked and won the 6-Day War. And I remember when I was a kid learning about, in 1967, learning about the 6-Day War, when I read it in Jimmy Carter's book and thought preemptive strike, what does he mean? How I learned it was that 3 countries had teamed up and challenged Israel on 3 different borders. And Israel struck first. And that was very interesting. And to this day, that 1967 is a controversial time because by some people's perspective, Israel struck first and conquered the land. By other people's perspective, they had no choice because 3 different countries were about to pounce on them. And so here is one of those confusing things where the Jews smote all their enemies. Preemptive? Perhaps, because they weren't really being attacked. But the fear of attack was there. And they slew and destroyed 500 men. Now, this isn't just Haman. This is another 500. So now this happens, and the king says to Esther, okay, they've slain 500 men. You want anything else? You know, whatever you want, queen, you've got it. And she says, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews to do tomorrow the same thing that they did today. Let's give it to Haman's 10 sons too. And so Haman's 10 sons are hanged. And then they go out and slaughter another 300 men, but did not touch the spoils. It's very interesting in the Torah when it talks about in acts of war that if you kill people but don't take their property, it's somehow more noble, that you're not doing it, that you're so this is wartime permissibility. But then they keep going. And they slay another 75,000. And then after 2 days of killing almost 76,000 people, 75,000 plus the 500, plus the 300, that's 75,800, plus the 10 sons of Haman, that's 75,811, including Haman. And so Queen Esther documents it. And she gives full authority to her relative, Mordecai the Jew. And these days of Purim shall be observed at the proper times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther have obligated them to do for themselves and for us, their descendants. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in a scroll that we call the Megillah. And the king laid a tribute upon the land, upon the isles of the sea, all the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, where the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next to the king, great among the Jews, accepted by his brothers, because he sought the good for his people and interceded for the welfare of his kindred. And that, my friends, is the whole Megillah, or most of it. So, a quick briefing of an entire book of the Bible, but what are your thoughts about some of the seedier elements? What do you think about the king's way of dealing with his first wife and obtaining a second?
It seemed like Ahasuerus was immature or very open to influence by others.
Is there a word, manipulatable?
Yeah.
Right. That he was first manipulated by the people who wanted to throw a party, by the people who wanted him to have Vashti dance, by the people who told him to get rid of Vashti. Then he's influenced by Haman to kill the Jews, influenced by Esther. He changes his mind back and forth. What they've called in American politics wishy-washy.
Well, does that remind you of any leaders in recent history?
Sure does. Lots of them. Right. All of them. Right. So even some bearded ones who go to Cancun. Oh, don't do that. Yes. But what about this idea? This is the part that seems to me contrary to some of the things Judaism teaches, that Haman gets replaced by Mordecai. And then Mordecai does as evil to the Shushanites as Haman was going to do to the Jews. So one of the, and I actually wrote this in my upcoming temple bulletin, but a friend of mine and I were discussing, just talking about Purim in general. And my friend had studied at Boston University with Elie Wiesel. And Elie Wiesel was like the biggest influence on his life. And Elie Wiesel suggested that maybe God is not present in the Purim book because God did not want to be associated with the slaughter at the end of the book. That's putting a lot of anthropomorphism into into God and his decisions about what is written and what is not written. But it was an interesting comment. Usually classical scholars talk about God's presence as being there but hidden, and hidden in an embodiment of the actions of Mordecai and Esther, but also that we hide our identities when we dress in costumes. The way Esther hid the fact that she was Jewish and then used it when she needed to. Another interesting thing about the Book of Esther is that it continues, that throughout the whole book, it talks about the Jews. And in very few other books of the Bible is Jew mentioned. Usually we're called Hebrews, Israelites, children of Israel. This is one of the few books in which we're actually called Jewish. And Jew comes from, post King David, then King Solomon, and Solomon's kingdom was split into Judea and Samaria. So Jew comes from Judeans. But it's another interesting aspect. Does this make you like Purim less?
No.
Okay, I got
Purim
a
less.
nod and I got a no. Who shouted out no? Roger, tell me.
Yes. The facts are the facts, and it is not unusual for human nature to act itself out and do what it believes is correct. And I think that justice served its due end in this particular scenario, and that we simply need to accept it with whatever blame may be appropriate to attribute to the acts of those who did them. Just life.
So if we're attributing blame to those who did them, there isn't any.
Whoa. I understand. I think I understand where you're going, but no, I think right is right, wrong is wrong, and it is those who contemplated the wrong who suffered, and that would be appropriate in the overall scheme of what is right or wrong.
All right. So Haman was the perpetrator, and
Right.
other people were killed because of Haman's decision.
I think that's a
That could be
reasonable summary of what I had to say. Yes, sir.
Yes. Some might say overkill.
Yes.
Yes.
That's true.
Now there's another incident of overkill in the Bible, in which another story that we don't tell children as frequently. As you know, Jacob, our ancestor, had 12 sons. He also had a daughter. Not everybody remembers the daughter because the daughter isn't mentioned much in the Bible. Only in one little section where it says that a neighboring prince took her by force, in other words, raped her, and he then fell in love with her and asked Jacob to marry her. And two of Jacob's sons, Simon and Levi, said, "Tell them we don't intermarry, that they're going to have to become members of our tribe in order to marry our sister." In order to become members of their tribe, what act has to happen to become a member of the tribe of the Israelites? The circumcision. So once again, not again, but before, the sons of Jacob and his sons said, "Not just you, the one who wants to marry our sister Dinah, but the entire village, all your men have to become circumcised. All the men become circumcised. The recovery time for circumcision was a little bit longer for an adult male in pre-biblical times. And they were weak from the procedure. And while they were weak, Simon and Levi went in and killed every man in that village. Came back to their father and said, "We have avenged our sister." And Jacob said, "That is not justice. You committed murder of dozens of people for one act of violence." And it's hard to tell, was Jacob not standing up for his daughter's virtue? Or was he saying that it was not justice because it was overboard? So he chastised his sons for going overboard. One of the things that, and you're welcome to disagree. I personally disagree that killing 75,000 plus was justice. It's kind of like when, goodness gracious, we have seen, and I stay away from making political judgments, but we've seen it all over. We've seen how Black Lives Matter takes a just concept that Black people are valuable, but then some go overboard and created riots. We've seen people making political statements that they thought President Trump should have won the election, and they went overboard with a violent attack of the Capitol. That part of, so I think what's interesting when you look at how do we look at these things for today's world, and what part of the thing that I think Roger is saying is the times are the times. And here's maybe what they needed to do to show we're not going to be pushed around. And yet, when we take a look at it in modern times, we have to be able to say, whatever behavior happened, we've got to look at it differently. And one of the things that we do when we look at it differently is we modify the narrative. We nice it up so that it's a fun children's holiday. And we don't talk about the degradation of women, the devaluation of women. We don't talk about modern people do and adults do, but a basic Purim celebration is let's have fun. Celebrate Esther's beauty, Haman's villainous, Mordecai's heroism. But then we also add some other customs. Beyond the fun party and the drinking, we say it's also a time for tzedakah, a time for giving gifts. And maybe that is a little bit of teshuvah, a little bit of retribution. Now, Debbie, you were nodding your head when I asked the question, does it make you enjoy Purim less? Unmute.
I think there was really no reason for what was done. A smaller show of force when the worst of Haman's followers were disposed of would have resolved the problem with a lot less lives. And you also remind me of when the Jews first went into Canaan and were more or less told, hey, take it over, without regard to the people who had lived there for how many hundreds or thousands of years.
Yeah,
that bothers me too.
And that, what you're referring to there, came from God. God said, disregard those who are there, this is your land. And we also have God telling angels in heaven, don't celebrate when Egyptians are drowning in the sea. So we do get mixed messages. And, you know, a couple of weeks ago, a student in one of my classes said that one of the most powerful teachings that he had experienced was the line in the book of Noah, in Genesis, that Noah was a righteous man for his time and he walked with God. And what this student was saying was, all times are different. And that what made Noah righteous in his time might not have been righteous in another time. And in fact, when there's some interesting things that happen with Noah after he embarks from the flood, after all this time that he spent with the animals, he lets loose, he plants the first vineyard, he gets himself drunk and behaves immaturely, to use Jeff's word. So I think that the Torah needs to be read in context of the time and in context of our time. That if this action, as Roger says and Debbie disagrees with, was justice at that time, we still have to look at it and say, what is justice in our time? Now, to me, looking at this and seeing Haman's actions, or not Mordecai's actions as being in some ways as bad as Haman's. You know, I mean, he didn't rid the world of all the Persians, but took away a lot of them. That this, I think, is an important lesson about reactions. That when we are wronged, that it's not our obligation to wrong the other. What do you think about that? Is there a difference between justice and wronging somebody else?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, I believe there is.
So a policeman who does his job properly, I mean, I'm just going to put it out there. A policeman who does his job properly should not be punished for the action of the policeman who killed George Floyd.
No, that I don't know that job was done properly. I think that's the question involved in that case.
Right. So they're right. So a lot of reactions led to violence against police, many of whom were innocent. The actions against the Persians, some of them might have been really happy and ready to kill Jews and thrilled about it.
Huh.
Some of them not. And so we killed them all without checking.
Huh. Yeah.
The policemen who were defending the Capitol, who got injured or killed, you know, that was also, and we talk about collateral damage, but we have to look at that in terms of how overboard do we get.
Well, that's true. In retrospect, it's easy to say that perhaps all Persians should not have been killed. And I don't know how you would, in those days, in those times, have made a decision as to, or how, as a practical matter, would have gone about trying to determine who was in favor and who was against.
Exactly. You wouldn't know because they were all given the permission.
Correct.
To kill the Jews.
Yeah. I
Right.
think that's the issue. They were all given the permission, and they were all, unfortunately, spoken for by someone who we do not know had the right to speak for everyone. So,
And that's what happens when we make assumptions based on, because they were Persians, they were likely, because he was Persian, he was likely to kill the Jews. Because he's black, he's likely to be in this neighborhood to commit a robbery. Because he's a policeman, he's likely to participate in racial profiling.
I understand what you're saying, but I think that the distinction becomes easier on a case-by-case basis in the modern world when you look at George Floyd and other circumstances. There were a limited number of participants involved. Those are the folks at which we have to look. Those are the folks whose backgrounds, whose history should be investigated before a determination is made.
Yep.
As opposed to 500 Persians who, who knows what they all thought or what they all did. It would have been impossible to investigate that as we could have 6 or 12 or 15 police officers in any given jurisdiction.
Lenny?
Couple of things. One, we're talking about systemic problems. And I think we're talking about it both in biblical times and in current times. If you take the premise that there is systemic racism, I'm just taking a premise, against blacks, again, premise, can we then make go backwards and look at it and say that the Persians had a systemic race against the Jews? Was that a systemic problem against the Jews? One. Second point is God had a way of making his displeasure known when something was done. He wiped out civilization. He wiped out Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yep.
And a couple of other things. If the story of Esther is in fact true, which is another issue, or maybe another issue, if he was displeased with the killing of the 75,811 people, thank you, Rabbi, he would have done something. The opposite side of that is, if the Persians at the time were such a severe threat to his people, the Jewish people, he would have done something. So I think we're arguing something that we don't know. Obviously.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent points, Lenny. In terms of what does God do, or what does God do through people? 3,000 people, according to Torah, 3,000 people were killed because of their participation in the golden calf. So here was something that was done, right? And so there was retribution against Jewish people for the golden calf, but there wasn't retribution for this. The first thing you said also was an interesting point about, what was it? First thing?
Systemic.
Oh yeah, right. So there is not an indication one way or the other if the Persians as a people were accepting or not accepting of the Jews. The only text piece that I got from that was Haman pointing out they don't follow your laws, they follow your own laws, their own laws. And when the decree came, that the people were perplexed. All right. But there isn't a strong indication the people being perplexed doesn't say that they were not going to follow the law. So the idea that there may have been a systemic thing about, if the king says it, I'm going to do it, go right ahead. So very interesting points. And I think that some of those points that you're making lead credence to me that it didn't really happen. Or maybe didn't happen in that way. That this was at a time when Jews were being persecuted, and all the Bible stories said, wait till God does something miraculous. And that in some way, shape, or form, we needed a way to say, we are going to create our own miracles. It came again in 1967, after the Jews had been persecuted in the Holocaust, finally got their own state, had been regarded as victims for their entire existence. Now there was this pride. In 6 days, we defeated 3 countries. But then all of a sudden, the perception of who the Jews were switched from being victims to being aggressors. So Purim is a story that says it's a macho story. We're able to take care of ourselves without waiting for God to pull off the miracle for us. Roger, do you have something to say?
Yes, I got a question. It could be, Rabbi, at that time, they usually, when it was like a politician or war, they will kill the children. That way they don't continue that. If you understand this correctly, there was him, and he was not the only one. You cannot be a leader all alone. It has to be followers. If you go as a politician, like I want to make sure nobody will come against my people again, what I will do, if I want to make sure I will wipe up everybody, not me, I'm saying the way for him not to have any dangers in future.
Yes, it's a very, very important point. Nobody could pull it off by himself. Haman wanted to get rid of all the Jews, but he wasn't going to do it himself. He wanted a rule so that everyone would participate. I remember talking to a 6th grade class once in Huffman who were very unfamiliar with Jewish people, but they had been reading a book about the Holocaust, and they had all kinds of theories about why Hitler hated the Jews. And and some of them were rumor and some of them were, different kinds of things. But eventually I said, it doesn't really matter what Hitler thought at all. All that mattered was that there were people who listened to him. If nobody listened to him, his plan would go. And so as Jeff pointed out, there was a king who was willing to listen to somebody. And he was a person in power to make a decree and to have it not done alone. So there perhaps is our other message. If we want to do good in the world, we have to get people to listen to us as well.
And his sons were hung with Haman, correct?
They were.
So
I think maybe after.
Right. According to an Orthodox site, the sons were hung a year later with another big uprising that went on. And it was in Adar. It was Adar 13th, and they were hung then. And so it wasn't at the same time. And I didn't go back to search it out, but it said in Esther, in the Book of Esther, in 8 and 9, if you do a really careful reading of the whole thing, you can see that there. Now, I didn't check that out, but that's what I
right. I think that's Midrash. I think that's, and there's a lot of midrash about Vashti and a lot of midrash about other things, but I don't think that's in the book of Esther. But it's an interesting thought, and especially when you see perpetration of activities that happen on anniversaries of things. You know, the Oklahoma City bombing and the Davidian Koresh thing were both around Hitler's birthday. So it's interesting that, so I think what's interesting for us is that we take our celebration and we don't really celebrate the murder of Persians. We celebrate Haman's death. We celebrate our freedom. And we take that whole bit and say, all right, let's have fun. So I'm going to encourage us to continue to have fun. And Debbie's saying, sorry, I have to leave early. You're not leaving early because we've run late. So thank you for engaging in a spirited discussion. I hope you'll come Friday night and have fun with us. We won't talk about murder. We'll just have fun.
Thank you.
I have to go
Thank
too,
you.
because I have to go get my COVID vaccine.
Right,
luck.
good for you.
Happy Purim, everybody.
All
Happy
right,
Purim.
thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.